Thank you so much, Louise, and hello everyone, and welcome to OTS Connect. Thank you again for giving of your own time to join us tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome Jeff Pellich, who will be facilitating tonight's webinar on boys literacy. Jeff was part of the Minds on Media team at OTS Technology Conference this past summer, and I know Jeff is very excited, and I'm eager to hear the many creative ideas that he has to share with us tonight and how to engage boys in the learning process. So, Jeff, welcome, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
Wow, thank you. So, I'm very much looking forward to this. I'm very excited and thrilled to be offered this opportunity to share a little bit of what I do in my classroom. I'm a grade 7-8 teacher. I teach in a class for students with a variety of mental health concerns, anxiety, behavior, a variety of things. And I've learned really quickly that, first off, I get a lot of boys in my class. I would say most years I have maybe one girl or two girls, and so I've had to be a little bit creative in the way that I plan, because the students that we get are often really struggle at school and don't always fit into a traditional classroom. So I'm a little bit lucky that way. So before we get started, what I want to do is, the name of my session is Ripping It Up, and one of the first things I like to do is to rip up some of the edu jargon that we all use. Because when you work with boys, you have to totally throw out the book sometimes and start afresh, start anew. So in the little chat, what I want you to do, we're going to get 1 minute, and I want you to put any of those famous edu jargon words that you know, and just, we're going to blitz it. We're going to go as quick as we can. 1 minute's on the clock. Wow, Louise, you rock. Put them all in there, right? And see how many we can get of the edu jargon words that people love. I'm going to also join in because it's fun. Assessment 4 of blah, blah, blah. That's a perfect one. We're hearing a lot of that lately. And it's okay. If people from the ministry see this, I'm pretty sure they would feel the same way. So that's awesome. And if you're still typing, that's fine. Keep going. Yeah, so there's tons of different things that we're told we have to do, that we should be looking to do in our classroom. And you know, many times they are really good ideas. But really quickly what you'll learn is when you're working with a class full of boys, when you put up a learning goal, they kind of just smile at you and go, whatever. We know that learning goal is going to change 100 times before we reach the end of this activity or whatever it is. So let's learn a little bit more about you before we get too started. We're going to use the polling tool off to the side. So first off, how long have you been teaching? And so over at the side, you'll see a little button with A, B on it, and you're going to choose which one best represents you. Beautiful. So it looks like we have a whole vast array of different experiences, which is great. So those of you that have been teaching for a while, I'll be for sure using you to share some of your experiences. And so we will just clear that. And the next question is, in which division do you currently teach? And for those of you that are teaching in multiple divisions, feel free to use answer D as your multiple divisions. Perfect. So again, the polling tool is just off to the side. It's the little box that has an A in a square with a little arrow underneath. And you can choose that to decide or to show which division you're currently teaching. Okay, and so the next one, Louise will probably clear that because she's super quick at all this stuff. Or, oh, darn. I tried to beat you there. So what level of technology skill do you feel best represents you? And this one's interesting because with some of the topics that I'm going to be sharing, it doesn't really matter which level you're at, because when it comes to using video games in the classroom, many times the kids are way better than the adults in the room and really truly have a good understanding of what they're doing. And I think I have another one here. Are you currently using Google Apps for Education? So Louise will probably change the option really quick to yes or no, unless I can beat her to it. Oh, she did it quick. Wow, Louise, you're good. So if you're currently using Google Apps for Education, so I have found that in working with boys, Google Apps for Education has been a lifesaver in many occasions, just because of the ease of use, the fact that they don't have to save. Impulsive kids, when they come across a problem or they get stuck, Google Apps automatically saves things every few seconds. So my students, I have one in particular who's diagnosed with attention deficit ADHD and is really quite impulsive, automatically just closes screens as quick as he can when there's an error. But Google Apps saves everything, so he's always very happy that things aren't lost when we go back and look. And a lot of the examples I'll be showing you today are in Google Apps, so that's perfect. But if you're not a Google Apps user, that's fine. You'll still be able to access them and hopefully become inspired and maybe start using them in your own classroom. So the first thing that I'm going to do to start today is always a bit of a challenge for me because it's a presentation style that is really structured. And I don't always do structure very well. And what's going to happen is there will be 20 slides. And for each of those slides, I will get 20 seconds to say what I want to about that slide. On the slide itself, there is only going to be a photo, and it is going to somehow relate to what I am talking about. And I have quite a collection of images that are funny and thought-provoking and everything else. And I try to trick you up a little bit so that you really have to think about how it relates to what I'm saying. And it's really neat because there's no text in this presentation, because so often, presenters have bullet after bullet after bullet. Well, this is not the case. So in a second, I'm going to start my own timer on my computer here. I don't know if Louise has a magical Physiological timer on the Blackboard Collaborate, but
I wish, but no.
Yeah. So I will manage it myself. But if you're following along on your own little timer, you can time me and tell me if I've made a boo-boo, but hopefully I don't. So this is a Physiological. At the end, if you're wondering how you can use this, we'll talk a little bit and debrief the way the presentation goes and how you can use this with boys. And I do have a template that you can access so that it's nice and easy for people to do a similar presentation. So without further ado, this is a little bit of Physiological to introduce myself and my classroom. So I was once asked to create a metaphor for my classroom, and the first thing that came to my mind, being that I teach a grade 7-8 behavior program, was a circus. And once I sat down and thought about it, because I originally was joking around when I said this, was that there's actually a lot of connections that can be made to my classroom and this early 1900s circuses, so the circuses of the 1900s in my classroom. And those connections, probably the most prominent of which, and sad, is the feelings of marginalizations by my performers or my students. And they feel on the outside of society. They don't feel included. And when we first began the program, we tried to create a community of respect and inclusion, very similar to that of the circuses of this time period. But what we found was that when it came to learning in academics, having a community wasn't enough, and we often continued to disrespect their unique learning needs by disregarding their passions, their interests, and focusing on what we felt was important to them, focusing too much on what the curriculum said. And we decided a revolution was in order. Get it, revolution? We began to ask the students what they would like to learn, how they would like to learn it, and other questions to guide their to guide our practice. But what they shared seemed to connect really well with 21st century learning. And so what we began to do is we began to look at some of the different options. But what we found was, skip that one, jumping in sucks. And just like jumping in cold lake water, you get in and you get hit with this overcoming sense of pain and you want to scream and you cry out. This is me in the summer in the lake. It was awful. But over time, you begin to adjust and you begin to love this experience. And it goes for students as well. And often they begin to struggle at the beginning in your classroom and they yearn for those worksheets and everything, and they want to get you to hold their hand through the process. But what they seem to realize is that once they get into it, with a little guidance and support, they can rock that outfit like nobody's business. And it can be a huge change, and we need to teach them the skills if we're going to ask them to use it. And don't expect that they were going to have these skills right at the beginning. Realize that if your lesson sucked before, it's going to suck even with technology. So you need to think critically about what you're asking students to do and decide if you want to truly engage this, if it's going to truly engage the students, technology or not. And if it stinks, throw it out and try something new. Because the one thing about vulnerable students is they're really good at questioning and challenging. And turning a worksheet into a game, it may occupy their time for a few minutes, but they're going to realize that you're just trying to trick them. And it's still drill and kill. Using technology also requires a little bit of luck. And sometimes you're just out of it. So the iPads won't turn on, the smart boards won't connect, or a car outside of your school will run into a pole and all the electricity will be down. And that happened to me. And once I heard a teacher say, technology isn't worth all the hassles. But if you support each other, and if you help each other and look for the students to also help you solve the problems, work together, you're going to find ways to make it happen. And you need to be a model for your students during these times, even with the most challenging students and boys. They're watching you to see how you handle these problems. And if you scream for help at the first sign of a problem, think about the message that you're sending your students. Troubleshoot together and model these skills. Let the students play. Yeah. When introducing them to a new web tool, app, or program, give them time to explore and play without the learning expectations first. And then when they get to an assignment, when they get to the learning goals, they're going to feel more confident and more ready to learn. And everyone wants these fancy 100 massage jet shower heads, but not everyone can afford them. And so in the meantime, beg, borrow, and steal. And I had to do this a lot with old generation devices, donated technology, or other creative solutions. All these things can still work, particularly with boys, because flexibility is extremely important. And I always allow my students the choice to make any changes to the assignments or projects that they want. And we'll talk about that later. Allow them the opportunity to change the way to express their learning. And realize that the curriculum watchdog is imaginary, but yes, it is always there. And think about the number of times administrators have said to you, there is no curriculum police, and just try your best to cover everything. But EQAO, parents, and other pressures are constantly on our minds. So my recommendation to you is you jump on that curriculum horse, or the dog, and use it to your advantage. And I apologize if you love the Queen. Start with the skills. Content will fall in line. There's a reason that they've been moved to the beginning of the curriculum, because those skills are probably the most important to create lifelong learners. Because here it is. The irony is, get it? The irony, anyways. There will always be a student who doesn't buy in. No matter how amazing your assignment is, no matter how many years into your journey of 21st century learning you are, sometimes, and I will say this from experience, there is always one student, and you know that student, who is always going to be the one that messes up the perfect, most beautiful picture. And it's going to throw you for a loop, and it's going to frustrate you. But what you need to realize is that if that happens, especially with adolescent boys, we need to let them do it and let them learn through their mistakes. Because sometimes the most simple easy tool is the best one for them to use. And the old way is the best way sometimes. So be flexible and learn with them. So I have 6 minutes and 20 seconds. So that means I went a little faster than usual for a PechaKucha. But that is what a PechaKucha looks like. And if you really enjoyed that, there's lots of different options for you to try it in your classroom, especially with boys. So what I found when using a PechaKucha is that because it's a presentation that is really clearly set out and very structured, it's not overwhelming for kids. And each slide is 20 seconds, and each slide is just a photo. So my boys struggle with writing. So you take that out of the equation. My boys struggle with filling in a certain amount of space. But when you say, well, you're only filling 20 seconds, they realize really quickly that they're able to do that. So what I want you to do really quickly is on our whiteboard here, you'll notice on the left-hand side, there's a little menu bar. Use the A tool to enter some text on the page and how you could see yourself using this within your classroom. How do you think that you could use a PechaKucha? What are some of the topics that you might cover? What are some of the different skills you could approach using that? So you just take the tool and you can start writing away on that board. And we'll give you about 1 minute or so to do that. So Louise, I'm not sure if you have my links or not, but for those of you that would like a link to the template, I do have those, and most particularly at the end of today's session, I have a whole Google Doc that has all the links and ideas and resources from my presentation today that I will share. So I use this every year with my students to, as you're typing you can listen, to do a getting to know you activity. Because I've tried a lot of different getting to know you activities, but a PechaKucha really gets them to think critically and engage and try some new things and bring out a lot of information that you wouldn't normally know. And we have learned so much from our students doing that. And one little trick that I learned is to have them record a PechaKucha using, so setting up the template, getting them to fill the template in, and then have them do a speech like we are today using a computer with GarageBand and record it. And then combine them together in iMovie. That way they don't even have to present it in front of everyone. So it's another great opportunity to get rid of some of that stress and the awkwardness that teenage boys often feel when they are in front of a group. So Louise has posted a whole bunch of different things there, including my Twitter handle, and my phone is going off like crazy right now, so thank you, Louise, and it's distracting me. So there's the template. So it's basically just a PowerPoint presentation with blank slides, but those slides automatically animate every 20 seconds. So it saves you a little bit of hassle doing that. And then also a rubric. Unfortunately, there it is, and then my phone goes again. A rubric that I found on the internet that I've used with my class to go through the PechaKucha and to give some marks for that. So what is this session going to talk about? I'm just going to give you another 10 seconds, and then I'm going to flip to the next slide. So like I said, ripping it up, totally changing the way that we do things sometimes. So I'm going to move to the next slide, and I'm sorry if people didn't get a chance to totally fill it in. We're going to talk about why and how boys learn in different ways. We're going to talk about how I engage boys in their learning using video games. And I'm going to give you some specific examples, resources, and curriculum links. And we're going to have some discussion along the way for those of you that like to chat a little bit about what we're learning. So this is me in a sumo suit, which was a very unusual experience. And if you've never been in one of these before, it's surprisingly very hot, and you sweat a lot when you're in these suits. I teach, like I said, in a grade 7-8 classroom for students with mental health issues. I also, in my classroom, I usually have 7-8 students, mostly boys, and I also am very lucky to have 2 child youth workers in my classroom. So I'm very lucky that way. In addition, I have a classroom budget, which is unheard of, and it's a quite substantial classroom budget because of the group that we work with, because often these students go out on field trips and we use the money to support that. And we also use that money to support technology in our classroom. So we're very lucky to have Chromebooks for our students. We have access to iPads and some other fun devices that we like to play with and experiment with. I actually just finished my master's, which I'm very proud of, and I wrote a thesis that looked at the elementary school experience of, thank you, Louise, elementary school experience of students who have become criminalized, so specifically males. And I spent some time chatting with them. I interviewed 3 males and multiple interviews, 4 to 5 interviews for each of the young men, and got them to reflect back on their elementary experience. And all 3 of them were between the ages of 18 to 25, so it's fairly new in their mind. And what happens is they talked a lot about how elementary school may have impacted their future involvement with crime. And so it was really kind of different and fun, and I learned a lot from it. And I just noticed in the chat there that the link to the Pechakucha is blank. It is blank, and that's okay. The Pechakucha is a blank document, so you can add your own photos to it. So it's just so that way you can share it with your students, and it's nice and easy for them to just add their own stuff. So who are my students? My students come from all over our school board, and to become part of our classroom, they have to have a variety of experiences with community mental health agencies, to have had significant involvement with our behavior team, our behavior resources within the board, special education. They must have a current psychoeducational assessment. Many of them have been excluded from school for extended periods of time. So they've really been misunderstood and struggled in school. And often we don't get the students who are really involved with crime yet, and the ones who are extremely confrontational or defiant. But what we get are the students who are just a little bit different, who don't fit into the mold of their class. And this photo really truly exemplifies what it is. The students who are, they don't always recognize that they're different, but they are often, with the rest of their peers, socially ostracized. So it's unfortunate at times. And so coming to our classroom means that they get the support of me and 2 CYWs, and no, we don't have any EAs, but we focus on social skills, we focus on academics, but everything we do really truly has the sense of community building, getting them to feel included, getting them to feel safe, and getting them to realize that school isn't a horrible experience. So it's we begin to feel like a family, and that's the best way to describe it. And because we have mostly boys in our class, they fight like brothers, they bicker like brothers, and it's quite a fun experience as we go through the year. And a lot of times our students are referred to as at risk, and I really struggle with this term. And Louise will probably post an article, but it's in my document at the end, that talks about switching this to be, Swatiner in her article talks about at promise. So moving from a real deficit-driven term to something that's a little bit more positive. So all students have this promise. All students have hope. And even the kids who really struggle in school, the ones that make us the most frustrated and angry, and we're always trying to sort of shift things around for, but it doesn't always work, they still have some hope. And to focus on that mentality. So hopefully as we move through, vulnerable is kind of like a, nah, it's all right, but we need to push it a little bit more. I like to say I promise, or we have hope for them. And just a caution before we move on, because this is often, my thesis advisor was always questioning me on this, was it's not just about boys. And gender isn't anything, everything. Gender is just one equation that we need to take into account. And just like every other accommodation or differentiation that we use in our classrooms, the things that we're going to do for boys, or the ideas that we have for boys, will often work for a variety of other students, girls included. And sometimes the ideas that I use in my classroom don't work for all of my boys either. And so there's just some general principles that I try to use as best I can to engage everyone. So why are these students disengaged? Why are boys struggling so much in school? So I'm going to start with a few quotations from some of the bigwigs who have done a lot of research into this topic, and get your initial gut reaction. Now, I truly want your gut reactions. I don't want don't think about it too long. I want you to go, oh, yes, I love this, or no, I can't stand this quote. So the first one is, girl behavior is the gold standard in schools. Boys are treated like defective girls. And over to the side in your toolbar, you'll see a fun little star thing probably. I want you to use that and point to where you stand when you read this quotation. So just put your dot over one of those four corners. It's like the fun four corners activity. Don't be afraid.
I'm just going to jump on while people are doing that. For those of you that aren't quite sure, perhaps logged on a little late, the Clipart tool is the very bottom tool in your tool strip. If you want to grab that, then it'll for sure, you can go to the Common Symbols tab and choose a symbol there, as well as using the Starburst tool that you see on the strip at the left-hand side of your whiteboard.
Why, thank you, Louise. So a lot of different comments here, which is great. And usually when I do presentations, this is the way. So it's hard in a webinar because I can't see your facial reactions and I can't engage those people that are disagreeing with me. But what I want you to do really quickly is on the next page here, the quote is in the bottom. Again, take the A tool and just one sentence why you felt that way. Don't go too deep into it, just one sentence why you think that. And if anyone's confident enough and instead of typing would like to jump on the microphone, feel free to raise your hand because I would love to get everyone involved, especially in having a real discussion on this would be fun too. Nice, go ahead, Nicole. So press the talk button and it should be able to go.
Oh, there we go. This is my first time. Press the talk button. I just started to type that I've got a class of 24 in my French immersion class, and I only have 8 boys, so I don't really see them as defective girls. I just see their behavior as unique to them, and the girls are not always gold standard and always getting gold stars, so I'm not strongly disagreeing, but I disagree.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. Great, so there's some great thoughts here. And again, these are some pretty challenging quotations that I'm going to give you that kind of get you thinking. And again, I don't necessarily agree or disagree with any of them, or I'm not going to tell you anyways, but some of them are pretty challenging. So the next one, I'm sorry if I'm cutting anyone off, I just want to keep going here. And again, the same thing, if anyone else wants to share some thoughts, great. So again, using the Clipart tool, here is a Christina Hoff Sommers quotation. Christina Hoff Sommers is a researcher in the United States and has spent a lot of time looking at boys and boy learners and offering some pretty challenging ideas about how boys learn. So this one is more specifically about aggression. So again, use the Clipart tool and decide which corner you would be most in. I'm seeing more agrees this time, so this one must not be controversial enough, which is disappointing. I like to challenge people. Great. And Louise has just posted a link in the chat to a video or a book actually called Christina Hoff Sommers, It's the War on Boys. There's also a video that I usually share in my presentation where she goes through a lot of these ideas in more specific detail. And again, if anyone wants to share, feel free to raise your hand. But again, really quickly, just add a couple, one sentence or two about why you agree or disagree with this point on the whiteboard using the A tool. So one thing I did not share at the beginning of my presentation was I'm a little bit biased in this, partly because I'm a male, but partly also because I have a very active 6-year-old son. And he is now in grade 1, which as a person who teaches all boys and teaches in a behavior class, I'm a little bit biased, and I have fun figuring out the whole school experience as a parent. It's very, very different when you're on the parent side of things, which I'm sure many of you can understand. So I'm seeing lots of things about roughhousing and school rules being anti-touch, and I think that's not a gender issue always, but sometimes that's just overly sensitive towards things, because anti-touch, a lot of times girls, especially in grade 7, 8, are huggy. And there was a controversy here in Waterloo once about no hugging in schools, which was a very controversial media issue. And I'll give you another about 10 seconds to finish off your thought. And like many of you, I struggle being on duty and seeing boys and calling them out on behaviors that may be completely natural, but go against the school rules, which is sometimes hard. And so the last quote that I'm going to share with you is this one. And this is from a book, The Wonder of Boys. The idea that boys need to get more time than girls need sometimes. So as you are agreeing or disagreeing using the clip art, I'd also like to say that a lot of these quotations are a result or kind of like a reaction to a lot of the research and discussion about how girls struggle in science and math. And there's a big push, especially in the early 2000s, to try to get girls more engaged in these topics. And a lot of the books that came out afterwards talked about, well, if we're going to talk about gender, let's talk about both genders. And so these issues are challenging that way. And that's why there's always a bit of a controversy. And feel free, if you want to, we're not going to put up the, I would like to get some different ideas and talk a little bit more about what I'm doing in the classroom. So if you would like to share a little bit more, feel free to do so in the chat as I go over a little bit more about what specific research has looked at with boys. So I'm just going to skip a few slides here. So 100. In one of my courses in my master's, I looked specifically at how boys are impacted by school culture. And this comes from a project called For Every 100 Girls. And it's basically just to raise awareness about the treatment of boys in school and how it can be very different. So I'm going to read some different statistics, and feel free to chat about them in the chat panel. And again, I have all of these links that will be shared at the end, so don't worry if you miss any of them. So for every 100 girls that graduate from high school, 96 boys graduate. Not too bad, not much of a difference, but for every 100 girls suspended from school, 250 boys are suspended. And I think we can all think about our schools and the number of suspensions and the disparity between boys and girls. And for every 100 girls expelled from public elementary and secondary schools, 335 boys are expelled. Sorry, not suspended, expelled. For every 100 girls diagnosed with a special education disability, 207 boys are diagnosed with a special education disability. And the last two that are really important and came out a lot in my research was for every 100 females ages 15 to 19 that commit suicide, 549 males in the same range kill themselves. And for every 100 girls aged 15 to 17 in correctional facilities, there are 187 boys behind bars. So these statistics are pretty shocking when you consider it, and definitely raise awareness to the fact that we do need to have a conversation about this and find ways to engage boys. And we often will need to do a better job of that. And there's a lot more statistics in this book than the ones I shared, and they're all quite chilling at times, and definitely things we need to consider when we're in front of a class that has boys in it. One of the reasons why my boys feel disconnected from school is this idea. They feel stupid. When I get the students in grade 7, 8, they're coming from years and years of school difficulties where they have not been successful and they have done very poorly in academics. They truly believe that they're not smart, and when you think about the buzzword right now, which is mindset, they have a real fixed mindset and they can't progress. And we need to make this so that they are able to believe that they are confident and competent. The students, boys, often as students feel bored and really disengaged from their learning. Their culture isn't really, and we're not talking about culture as far as different faiths or different ethnicities, but boy culture isn't always present within curriculum. And not all boys are the same either. And so we need to be really aware of how we engage student voice in the classroom. It's not a one-size-fits-all for any gender. And I would say this is particularly evident in content areas. That one of the students in my study, in my research for my thesis, said, I'm not going to be a scientist one day, so why the heck do I need to listen in science? And it's more than that. Scientific thinking is more than just the content. We need to get them thinking in ways that's appropriate for content areas, not just the specifics content that they need to learn. And like it said in one of the quotations, rough play and roughhousing is often really discouraged in school. It's almost like we want to bubble wrap kids sometimes. And there was an Australian school, I believe it was, Australian or New Zealand, that got rid of all the rules in their school and allowed the kids to climb trees, allowed them to be a little bit rough on the yard, and got huge success because of that. And again, there's always going to be a debate between what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, and how we can do a better job with that. But Hoff Sommers uses a quotation, or uses a specific example from California, where a student was actually suspended for creating a gun from their cheese string. And the student was suspended. And this is the kind of over-exaggeration, overreaction to something without getting into a conversation about peace studies and anti-war and everything like that. But it's things that often boys are really interested in, but schools don't always do a really good job because of all the issues when it comes to gun violence. We need to be careful, but where's the balance? And another big one is the physiological differences between boys and girls. And there's a lot. And in the handouts that I'm going to share with you called Boys in School Culture, there's a lot of research that truly shows, Michael Garian is a researcher that talks about the brain specifically and the differences in girls and boy brains and how they are different. Thank you, Kelly. It was New Zealand. Awesome. Yes. Right area of the world. But so gender differences in the brain. Everything from girls' brains mature earlier to girls absorb more sensory data and girls have better control of impulses. And so think about your boys in your classroom as I go through some of these. Has a huge effect. Boys don't process serotonin as well as girls, and so that's the chemical that makes us feel good. And so it makes them more impulsive and more fidgety. When it comes to hormones, so the effects of estrogen and versus testosterone have a huge difference when it comes to the way that we behave. Boys use the right hemisphere more than girls use the left hemisphere more. So boys process emotions from an area of fight or flight from that same area. So when boys get upset, the reaction is often a lot more in your face, whereas girls, their emotions are more complex. They process it in the area for more complex thought. And there's more. And so again, the book, Michael Garian, he wrote 2 books about boys and brains. So there is some scientifically proven evidence that boys do learn differently than girls that we need to consider. So what can we do to act now? What are some of the things that we can do, even with little or no technology, that boys can be engaged? So I'm going to put that question to you first. So around the Act Now button, what are some different simple differentiation techniques that you've used in your classroom that have been effective? So we'll set the timer for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, and come up just brainstorm some different ideas that could differentiate for boys and engage them more in the classroom that you have seen work that have been effective. And then I'll share a little bit some of my general ideas. Videos. Yes. My students, I saw someone that showed videos instead of reading text. My students will watch videos every second of the day if they could. Learn 360, yep, and YouTube, they love them. My first school, I had a ball for myself, one of those red, white, and blue balls that I would bounce as I went up down the hallway. My principal used to get really mad at me, but it helped with my anxiety, bouncing the ball away. And again, if anyone wants to jump in with voice, I know that's always a great way to share in addition to the writing. The body breaks in the physical activity. I've noticed that a couple times. Very rarely, I think in the 8 years that I've been in behavior, have I taken away a kid's nutrition outdoor break, a boy's outdoor break. They need to get up. They need to move around. And in fact, often when my students are finding themselves not focusing or getting more anxious, I'll say, go outside, even if it's not break. Take a few minutes. Get your body moving and then come back. So breaks, why do they always have to be when it's scheduled? I know when you have a full class of students, it's hard to be able to supervise, but it's definitely something to consider. Get them up, move around, even if it's just to take something down to the office. That fake envelope with hello to your office manager is always a good way to get the kids moving. So those are some great ideas. And here's some general principles before I share some of the specifics of things that have worked really well in my class. First off, flexibility and choice. My partner will be very excited because I'm about to quote Barbara Coloroso here. When I am doing an activity and when I introduce a topic or an assignment, and I have students who are like, this sucks, this is boring, I don't want to do this. Can I do this? I don't want to do this. Can I do something else? Instead of saying no, I say convince me. So I let my students change or flip around what they're doing in the classroom to meet the learning goal in any way that they feel is going to work for them. And again, I have flexibility because I have Chromebooks, I have iPads, I have LiveScribe pens, I have all these cool little toys to use, and I show them how to use them. We get them familiar with these tools. Then they have a toolbox that they're able to go back to when they have a learning goal that they need to explain. Oh, darn, I'm using edu jargon. I apologize. But anyways, those are some of the things that you can do. So instead of just automatically saying, no, you must do this worksheet, you must do this project in this way, you must use iMovie to share your learning, and say, convince me of what's going to work for you. And like Laura said earlier, it's not going to be, we can't have a one-size-fits-all. She mentioned, of course, to gender and schooling, but one-size-fits-all doesn't work when it comes to assignments either. Destruction and creation can sometimes equal learning. So creation is great. We do a lot of projects in our classroom that involve creating things. But sometimes taking things apart is just as good. So one of the best, most engaging tasks we've ever done in our classroom is when I give the student something and they take it apart and they learn. And so this could be everything from physically taking apart a computer to talking about why we like this textbook or why we don't like this textbook and then making it better. So that often will create something that is better. So boys like to be critical. Boys like to think about what's wrong with it and then flip it on its head and say, how can we make this better, can create some really good learning. And most importantly, fun. And I have a colleague who works for our school board who is really critical when I say this, because I really believe if we can make the learning as fun as we can, kids are going to take in more. And there's a lot of research to support this. So here's my quick question to you. Does learning, in your opinion, have to be fun? So think about the most challenging math task that you do. Does that have to be fun for the kids to learn? Or should they just grin and bear it and learn it? Yes, why not? Perfect. That's a great answer. So again, use your text tool on the toolbar. Fill it in on the blue box there, what you think. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. Everyone has their opinion, and it's fine to disagree. Some people are just using the polling tool, which is another great way to do it. I love that. I didn't even think of that. I love the comment. If a student has decided that something isn't fun, it's hard to convince them otherwise. Again, I have some students that are really disengaged, and I totally agree with you. There's some students, if they've decided it's not fun, it's really hard to convince them. And sometimes it's not because of your assignment, it's because of they may have done a math assignment similar to this that they just couldn't get into, and getting over it, they would rather be defiant than look stupid. And so it's hard to get them to switch. I agree. I'll give you another about 20 seconds with this one. My vote is for fun. Great. So what would my colleague argue? My colleague would argue, if this was her here, she would say that sometimes some things in our job are not fun, and that we need to learn how to push through, we need to learn how to persevere to get through those things that are really challenging. Which is hard to disagree with, because I can tell you that I thoroughly dislike writing IEPs. I very much dislike writing IEPs. Developing grit. Nice. So I'm just going to flip to the next slide. Again, if you have any more comments, feel free to dump them in to the chat. Here's a little quote. Learning at its best should be fun. And learning is not necessarily easy. It takes time and effort. Fun and joy can inspire learners. And so what I take from this is that the most challenging tasks, if we can find a way to make the ones that kids automatically get their back up against, the ones that they really strongly dislike right out of the gates, if we can find a way to make those fun, maybe we're going to be able to get them to get them through it. Because the one thing that we know about enjoyment, when we're enjoying a task, when we're having fun, there's dopamine coming out of your brain. And if we can get students to become addicted to learning, to get addicted, so as they're learning, they're beginning to feel the effects of dopamine in their brain, that they're feeling engaged and motivated, and they like it, then hopefully the boys who are challenging the most, struggling the most, the ones that have truly learned that school is not fun, will begin to associate school as feeling good. And in the 6 years that I've taught in a congregated program, we've had fairly good success with kids who have really struggled with attendance, who eventually begin to learn that I want to come to school. The ones that don't like coming to school and behave poorly have all of a sudden become star students because they're getting the feeling that this is good, this is right, learning can be a fun experience. And we also teach them when a task isn't automatically fun, isn't automatically something that they enjoy, how can we make it better? For me, writing IEPs is far better with a glass of wine than it is sitting at my desk in the middle of the day or during a lunch period. So finding those ways to make tasks fun and being really explicit. When we do writing, you've probably heard about a think aloud when you do writing, and you're explaining and talking out what you're doing as you're writing to get the kids to know what your thought process is. It's the same thing when it comes to differentiating, getting them to self-accommodate in a task. So here is one low-tech, no-tech option. If you're at a school that doesn't have a lot of technology, if you are a teacher an occasional teacher who is going to a class one day and you're not a big fan of the plans and you want to do something that's still going to get some marks, what can you do? Well, here's something really, really simple that my students love, and we will spend hours talking about these. Here's a picture. This is what I would do with my students. I want you to give it a try. What I want you to do is write one sentence and one sentence only. It cannot be any longer than one sentence. That's it. It's a story starter. So you're going to write one sentence around this photo that would start a story to go with it. So take a second and do that, and let's see some of the fun things that we get. And again, I would model for them. We would talk about what we see, maybe come up, tastes like, sorry, tastes like chicken, I love it. Talking about how we get the creative juices flowing. And usually what it turns into is a test of your one-liner abilities. These are great. So remember, just like my students, it's a story starter. So you want to make it so that it's not necessarily a title for the photo, but a way that something, I love that Jake was walking down the street when he saw ... Some way that they could continue on with the story. The titles are great too, though, because they're cracking me right up. The prana attacks. I think I went the wrong way. I'll give you another 20 seconds or so. So one of the ways that we do this, we've done this a whole bunch of different ways. We've created a Google Doc and just had them type it in. We have done a Today's Meet, so it's just todaysmeet.com, where I've shown a whole bunch of pictures, and we've brainstormed a variety of story starters with that. And then what we do is we take those story starters, so we have a list like you have here, along with a photo, and then I make them write a 100-word story. So Louise has posted a sample of one of my students' 100-word stories. And there is a website where people online create these 100-word stories. And if you don't know what they are, essentially what it is exactly what it says. It's only 100 words. And it's not 101, it's not 99, it's exactly 100. And my students love taking up the challenge of making it 100 words. And it's doable. So I guarantee the first time you say a 100-word story, It'll be like the first time you wrote a 1,000-word essay, and the students will think that it's painful and it's going to be so long, and then they write the 100-word story and they go, holy smokes, that was amazing. And so we do this sentence starter or story starter with about 10, 15 photos. I let them choose the photo that they want and then write the 100-word story. And I say the 100-word story needs to end in a cliffhanger. So by the end, I have 8 students, so by the end of the week, we have 40 different stories of 100 words. And so for the following week, I'll say, write a sample, a 300-word story, and I think I gave Louise a sample of one of those too. So, but they can pick any one of the 40 stories that they like and take it further and make it a 300-word story. And then it makes it the developing ideas, you go a little bit further, and then you're able to start doing some proofreading where they share their Google Doc with other people in the class, and then we proofread. And I've even ended up getting them to record them as little 300-word podcasts with some scary music and stuff in the background. And it's really great if you do it with a theme. So if you're doing a science fiction unit, you could do science fiction pictures. If you want to do, I've done a slapstick version of this where it's all photos with some slapstick humor, and boys love slapstick. So there's oh, sorry if the link doesn't work. If it doesn't work right now, I'll make sure it works before. It might just be a sharing issue. Yeah, I'm going to copy and paste into it. Okay, thank you, Nicole. So that's just one of the quick ideas that you can do and get tons and tons of writing from them. Because boys hate to write, 100-word story is something that's doable and realistic for them. So we're going to talk a little bit about gaming. And again, this is going to be one of the last little activities for you to get involved. We're going to put 1 minute on the timer in 1 second, once I say go. And I want you to write as many of the games from your childhood as you can. And it's not necessarily video games, but games that you remember playing when you were a kid. So think back to all those different things, as many as you can. And it doesn't necessarily have to be at school. It could be at home. It could be video games if you were a kid that had video games. It could be games that you played with your grandparents. So 20 seconds or last. Got some great games here. I did this in the summer at the OTF conference, and I think the most that one group got was 25 or 30 different games. Some of them were very unique. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? I can't tell you how much I wanted to just sing that. Beautiful. So if you're just finishing off, that's great. So it's a giant list. And the fact that someone just wrote a bad word on the screen. Good job. The fact that we can remember all of the, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? The fact that we remember this is amazing and is really truly a testament to the value of dopamine, that you can remember these things. When I was a child, I would play, I know it's a card game, but it's still a bad word. It's great. It's exciting. Sorry. When I was a kid, I remember on Friday nights, once in a while, sitting down with my parents and my brother and playing euchre. And so I can remember being like 8 or 9 and learning all of the rules of euchre and remembering the rules and learning how to play it and being really good at it. Now I go to euchre parties and I still remember all those rules. And really a 9-year-old is not always going to remember all of these, shouldn't always remember these rules, but because we're engaged, because we're motivated, because we're having fun, we do. And Louise, I just have one quick question for the sake of the group. Is this the first time that there's been a bad word used in an OTF session?
That's a good question. I don't track that statistic.
Well, we need to. That's a good one. I love it. So gaming equals fun. And fun can equal learning. And with video games, Boys, if you say, today guys, we're going to play a video game, guarantee you're going to get the most reluctant student to sit up and listen. And why is that? Well, surprisingly enough, even the ministry has put out something. The Literacy and Numeracy Secretariat, in one of their documents talked about, in their What Works document, talked about video games and why they can work. And here's some of the research and why video games work for kids when it comes to learning. So it's great. And there's always going to be good and bad. And being aware of the bad things that can happen in video games, kids who are 10 years old playing mature video games, yeah, that's not okay. There's violence in video games, yeah, that's not okay at school. But being aware of that and recognizing the arguments good and bad is really important. And we don't play video games alone in my classroom. Very rarely are the students sitting by themselves playing a game. It needs to be a social experience because gaming systems today are all set up to access Wi-Fi, to go online, Xbox Live, PSN, all these. That's PlayStation Network. All of these things, even Minecraft, are played online. And so it's a perfect opportunity to use these video games to talk about math, to talk about language, to talk about all the other content areas, but also be teaching digital citizenship skills that they're learning, that they need to learn. I started playing a game online this summer, and it's a more mature game, but there was a lot of teenagers or young adults playing it, and they didn't have very good digital citizenship skills, and it was frustrating beyond belief. So we need to practice these. We need to do that. So where do we start? Well, we can look at two different ways of using games. So we have game-based learning, which is where the game is a real game, so something like SimCity or Civilizations, or Minecraft is one that a lot of people are really familiar with, versus something else called gamification. So if you've used Dreambox, that's an example of gamification, where they take different learning things and put them into the game. So drill and kill apps where you're practicing your multiplication tables, where you're doing some basic math problems. And this comes from the business world, where business people realize, well, people are going to be more interested in learning WMIS if we make it a fun game. And I would love to see that WMIS be used in our board because it would be much more fun. But two different ways that you can use gaming. So gamification is a big one. So again, I mentioned Dreambox. Another one that I use in my classroom is Manga High, which is a math one, and it's free, where you can track the students and see how they've done in the game. And Edmodo, if someone's asked me if it was Prodigy that I was playing, it wasn't. Edmodo, which is an online social network, but it has lots of apps where you can do some simple gamification games. I don't use them a lot because what I find is with Dreambox and with Manga High, all of these games the kids figure out. They figure out that it's just the basic drill and kill and they get bored. So I try to find games that are more engaging. And I do that by using game-based learning with these three concepts that ways I envision how I use games. One is to connect to learning. So I use a game which is called flick fishing, which is basically fishing. You're going out to a lake or different places to fish and catch fish, and I use it to connect to things like data management. So we fish and we catch the fish, and we keep track of the sizes, and we start graphing, and we talk about the probability and what's the probability of catching a fish over 50 pounds and that kind of stuff. We do games as learning. So instead of doing a novel study, doing a game that has a story to it, and then doing very similar things that you would do with a book, even doing everything, instead of doing a literature circle, doing a gaming circle. And then finally, as an extension of learning. So a game like Civilizations or SimCity, which is, both of them involve building a city, and the way that the creators have built the game is so that it follows the general rules that cities do. So you need to make sure that industry isn't near residential zones, and that if you are a city, you need to have things like a police station and a fire station and all these kind of things, a gaming circle, Beth. I love it. So that's another way to use it, and as an extension of learning. So you learn these concepts using a textbook even sometimes, but then you apply them to the game. But again, it ain't break time when you're playing these games. You need to be teaching these skills. Conflict resolution, taking turns, offering suggestions, giving feedback, listening to others, accepting feedback, problem solving, all of these different things. When you're using the game and you're working through it as a class or in small groups, you need to be addressing. Because even my grade 8 boys struggle with taking turns. And teaching those skills are just as important as what you're getting to as far as the content and the skills in the curriculum. And last but not least, find games that are cheap. So appcrawler.com is one of the websites you can go to if you use an iPad or Android device or any of the devices, even on a computer or online. Finding games that are free can be done, and some of them are extremely powerful. And I'm going to share with you 2 games and a whole bunch of different examples of how I use them in my classroom. And both of them are available on multiple devices. And the first one is probably my most popular game with students and with adults. It's called Machinarium. And if you just do a Google search for Machinarium, you'll see very quickly that it's not a game that is super popular. So most of the students will not have heard of it. It's an indie game. So it's a small independent company that made this game. And their focus is on art. The game is very artistic. The game is a point-and-click game, so there's no text. You just touch the screen of an iPad or click with your mouse to select it. But it's a story. And it's a story of the robot who's at the top of the mountain there. His name is Joseph. And he has to overcome a whole bunch of different challenges to beat the game. And the story, if you can see behind him, I'll use my little pointer tool here, these guys are the bullies in the game. And throughout the game, there's flashbacks about Joseph growing up and how those two characters used to pick on him, and now they're the bad guys. They've become these, they've wanted to plant a bomb in the city, the robotic city in the background there. And he has to try to catch the bomb while making friends with this girl in the front and saving a whole bunch of different people and solve these little puzzles to win. So the first thing that we do with this game is to do what you do with any other book at the grade 7, 8 level, and talk about the different features, the different structures of the game. Break it down on a plot graph. I actually have a stuffed Joseph that you can buy online, a little plush toy. And I created this, the plot graph on one of my bulletin boards and moved Joseph around the plot graph, and we plotted as we played all the different most important events that happened and where it would fit on the plot graph. Simple, but very effective for them to follow through. So if they missed a day, because we played it all together as a group, not individually, they could look up on the board and they could see where we were. And then we did with robot narrative. So throughout the story, you see all these flashbacks. And we talked about, so what happened to Joseph in his life? What are some of the different things that took place before the game began? And what they had to do is basically write from Joseph's perspective what happened. And it allowed us to basically assess all the different things that have happened, how well they followed along with the game. But in addition, write from the narrative form, do some proofreading, editing, all those different kinds of things that you would do in a writing assignment. And then we started getting to more obscure things with the game. So it's not just about the game itself and playing the game and mapping along as far as like a gaming circle that Beth suggested, but we took some math. So I have a whole bunch of old technology in my room. And we talked about e-junk. So if I went back to this first slide here, you would see it's all basically, oops, nope, not that one, right here. It's a bunch of old technology that's been broken down. That's outside of the city. It's old computers and stuff. So I went about and I got some old computers, which is surprisingly easy to do. Just make an email and send an email to your teacher friends and say, if you have old technology, give it to me. And like I said in an earlier slide, break it up, tear it apart. And my students began to tear it apart, and we did a geometry assignment where we were looking for all the geometric shapes that we could find in e-junk. And we would rip it apart, put it on a board, and start talking about, well, what makes it a rectangle? What makes it a 90-degree angle? All these different things. So again, taking the assignment, breaking it down further, and having a lot of fun with it, and the kids thoroughly enjoyed ripping apart It's a great assignment. That is a lot of fun. One of my students all of a sudden decided he wanted to make some art. Now this isn't the picture itself. I wasn't able to get a picture of it before he ran away with it. But he made Yosef out of a variety of different pipes and stuff that we found just laying around. So it's proof of the fact that the kids became totally engaged in this, and we created a whole art project around the character. And we talked about the different character features, and we did a character study about Yosef, the main character, and everything related to him. And they were totally engaged. And to this day, those students continue to ask to sit with Yosef and take Yosef to their desk. And this is grade 7, 8 boys. They want to hold on to a plush doll named Yosef. So, proof. And last but not least, my favorite assignment when it comes to robots, when it comes to Machinarium, we actually build a robot. This is a robot called a BristleBot. And if you go online, and Louise will post a link to how you can find the pieces you need and how you can build it, a little instructable. All it is a toothbrush, the head of toothbrush, a battery, which you can get 3 of them at the dollar store for $1, and a little motor that is in a cell phone. And you can buy just the motor piece online. You can buy usually between 20 and 30 of them for under $20, depending on how keen of a searcher you are on Google. And these motors, when they're plugged in and the battery is touching the motor, jiggles the toothbrush so that it moves around. And what you can begin to do is you get the kids to, using some of the scientific thought that so many of them are reluctant to talk about. I hate science, but getting them to think, okay, so force. So if this object is moving, where is it going to hit another BristleBot? And how can you make it so it disrupts the center of gravity? How can you make it so that when it hits it, it will knock the other BristleBot over? And you begin to do little battles with BristleBots. And we had a 2-week competition where they tested their BristleBot, and they would track some different stats and make observations and record the changes that they made with their BristleBots, because you can add everything from pipe cleaners to the front of it. Some of the boys, instead of just putting the battery right on, yes, I want to make this robot too, and I love that. Instead of putting it just right on the toothbrush head, putting it on popsicle stick and then gluing it to the BristleBot. It's a fantastic, inexpensive way to make robots that work. And again, all it is are these 3 things: a toothbrush, a battery, and a little motor. It's super fun, and the kids will become very engaged in it, particularly the boys. It's almost like, what's the name of that show? Someone's going to know it. The robots where they battle. It's almost like that. Every time I introduce this, the kids say, oh, it's almost BattleBots. Yes, you guys rock. Very similar to that. And if you like Machinarium, you will also find that they created another game called Botanicula, which, similar art. Again, there is no text in this game. There is no words. So the students who really struggle with taking in oral material or reading and decoding words, they're actually able to overcome that in these games. And particularly for boys, they do very well with the manipulating the objects on the screen to solve some of the problems. So it's another game that works very well. And another favorite for my students is the classic Plants vs. Zombies. Now, I don't know about you, but you've probably heard a lot about zombies in the media. And kids love zombies. And because of The Walking Dead, because of Plants vs. Zombies, because of everything out there. And so I used this to my advantage. And the first way I did that is mathwithzombies.wordpress. And I'm going to give you 2 links to Google Docs where it's math problems that relate to zombies. And not only does it relate to zombies, but it also relates to the outbreak of the zombie plague. You're the military and you have to try to figure out how to set up a quarantine around a city. These are all math problems that are much more hands-on and realistic, and we get to draw pictures, and the amount your most reluctant math students will all of a sudden talk about, well, I need to set up a quarantine and I got to make sure that my perimeter, and you say perimeter, what do you mean by perimeter? Well, the outside of the city. Oh, okay. So, and then you start breaking it down all from a zombie. all thinking about zombies and how to overcome it. So there's a whole bunch of different word problems on that site. And I believe I've given you the links for 2 that allow you to, where you get the kids to go walk through the problem-solving method to solve it. And again, flexibility is really important here because even with these assignments, sometimes kids will say, well, it's still math. I don't like it, and I don't want to do it on a Google Doc. And so in one case, one of my students, I gave him my whiteboard markers, and I said, go. And all of a sudden, he went up to the whiteboard and solved the problem and talked it through to one of his friends, and it was great. It was perfect. So being flexible and breaking outside of the totally cliched box is a really good experience for kids. And my absolute favorite time of the year is when we go zombie, which is eat flesh, which is zombie menus. And this came out of how many times I've had people say, kids love writing menus. And I would try it with my students, with my boys, and they would hate it. They would hate every second of it, even though they love food. So many of them would go, this is boring. And I went to a session at ECHO, which is the educational computer conference in Ontario, where one of the speakers was talking about boys in writing, and he mentioned, don't get queasy around boys and let them write. And so I came up with this idea. Well, what would it be like if a zombie went to a restaurant? And these are some of the things that they would eat. I'm going to fast forward this, and I'll come back to this in a second. Earchos. Ears mashed together and cut up into pieces small enough for one bite, topped with smoked nails, served with a side of rotten flesh covered in tiger skin. Disgusting for dipping. This was written by a student who writes at the grade 2 level. That was where his psychoeducational assessment put him. But all of a sudden, when he was given the challenge to write for a zombie, this is what he came up with. Or, let's look at deep-fried brains. They also had to find photos, and I couldn't get rid of the photos because they're just so gross. They're awesome. A fried brain slavished in blood and covered in leg muscle juice, served with a side of spinach dip lavished with ear hair. You can add urine. They all giggle when you say pee or poo. So urine salsa, the main ingredients being urine and salsa with lethal injection cheese, guaranteed to give you wings like Red Bull. I always forget what that one is. And he's our sponsor, Red Bull. Anyways, but yeah, so one of the good questions is, what do the parents think? Well, in most cases, the parents are like, my kid wrote that? Seriously? And when you compare their writing in previous years to what they did now, it's great. They're like, wow, this is amazing. They're actually writing. And truly, these are things that the students have done mostly by themselves. Now, it wasn't just as simple as giving them a photo and then they would do this. I don't know what that thing is, but it's disgusting. But it's toenails made into dough, grinded up toenails into dough, stupid outer space bread. So some really great writing here, very vivid and disgusting, but this is how we did it. So these are some of the steps that we took. And the first thing was we deconstructed menus. So I gave them real menus, and how many brain dollars is one earcho dollar? I have no clue. Gave them a link to this document, and together we constructed this list of nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, great phrases that you find in menus. And we created a list, and there's also a sample list that you'll get in the document, or Lisa will post, where you can see some of the things that the kids came up with. So we're reading the menus, and they knew what we were doing. We're trying to pull out words that are going to eventually be used in a zombie menu. And it's amazing how well even delicious menus can be used to create nasty food. And then we gave them this planning document, which I'm happy to share with you. So we talked about, so you need appetizers, you need entrees, you need desserts, and they had to create a certain number to make it a good menu, because you can't have only entrees at a zombie menu because the zombies wouldn't like that. What happens if they just want nachos? Well, so they had to think that way. But they wrote, and the amount of discussion we had, it got to a point where every day we would have to set aside 10, 15 minutes for the students to share their writings. And most of the time we were all laughing and giggling, but they were getting up and they were sharing they were reading, and they were giving feedback to each other. And these are extremely reluctant learners, and they became totally engaged in it because we weren't worried about, well, you can't talk about ear chokes, cutting off ears. It was fun. They loved it. So I'm going to fast forward through these ones. And then the last little thing that I'm going to share about Plants vs. Zombies is an assignment which we called the zombie compound. So we talked to one of our big inquiry questions, there's a buzzword for you, is are we prepared for zombies? And in the case of a zombie apocalypse, are we ready? And to decide, are we ready and how can we be more prepared, we got them to build a zombie compound. And we gave them a topographic map of Canada. So online, you have access to all of the topographic maps for Canada, and Louise will post that. Government in Canada doesn't, so we talked about how you read topographic maps. What are the different things you need to know? What is the legend? And they had to decide where they would put their compound. Now, most of them, using their critical thinking skills, decided, because of the media, tells us that zombies can't swim, and so they found an island in the middle of a lake that was big enough, and so we had to talk about scale, and we began to, and we would actually physically go out with them with a measuring tape and measure out what does 50 meters look like, what does 100 meters look like. We compare a topographic map that they were using of their island to a topographic map of their community, so making it realistic and hands-on. And they would then decide, okay, well, this is where I'm going to build my compound. And we would talk about, okay, so in this topographic map, you can't have, there's no electricity, so it needs to be self-sustainable. So they had to use some different sustainable energy options. So that's a science curriculum that we started addressing. So they were learning a little bit about wind energy. They were learning about solar power and which one they would use and which would be best for, in the case of a zombie apocalypse, that they could last the longest. Then we started talking about agriculture. So depending on where they placed their zombie compound, they would have to use their knowledge of Canada's landscape and where it is in the country and climate and everything else to decide, well, what can grow here? And so as you can see, it was a whole bunch of different content areas all into one. And again, everything related to zombies. And at the end, once they got to the end, planning all these things, they would build it in Minecraft. So using Minecraft, they would try to construct land or build up their land to look similar to what the topographic map would look like and go up from there. So that's how we'd cover a whole bunch of different content areas. Again, thumbs up, all using zombies. And last but not least, before we have a couple minutes of questions and I get kicked off of here, Sphero. So this is a new thing that I've been playing with. It's this tiny little ball, which is a robot. And they're about $100 or so at Chapters or Future Shop. But they're also really trying to push education. And you control them by using an iDevice, so an Android or an iPhone or an iPad. And it rolls around and it dances and it has all these different LEDs. And they have a fantastic website with a whole bunch of different educational usages for the device itself. And the one that we've started to play with, I'll show you a quick picture here, is building a wall. My students are building walls out of wood that you can buy at any craft store or the dollar store, where if the Sphero were to run into it, it would stay up. And so we spent a lot of time going over, talking about some of the grade 7 science curriculum, which is product testing, which is, again, center of gravity, balance, making sure everything is symmetrical, going through, but the big push for this assignment with the wall has been testing, changing things up, trial and error, making a blueprint, and using some of the basic tools like a little hand saw, which, again, it's really soft wood, so it comes apart really easily to build these walls. And if you notice in the top picture up here, at the dollar store you can get those things that you put fake flowers into. So that's what's holding it in. So again, it's trying to mimic what different types of soil or things that walls would have to go into, very similar to like a fence in the backyard. So it's getting the kids doing something that is usually not a super fun topic, but because they get to use Sphero, because they get to use a wall, they're excited. So again, I'm using this Sphero for a whole bunch of different building things. So bridge building. So instead of just having them build bridges, the Sphero has to cross the bridge and be able to get from one side to the other. Creating a chariot that you can attach to this ball or somehow put over the ball so that the ball can drag the chariot around. So it's another option of a different way of approaching a concept, which isn't always fun. And it's a little bit cutting edge because not a lot of people know about these right now. So that is my presentation. So before sending you out into the world, and hopefully you're not too overwhelmed and scared, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat or bring voice to it and press talk and talk away.
I can see the questions coming up in the chat already. And I just want to make sure, Syria, did you get bumped out of this session? I think that she got bumped at the last second there. So hopefully, she's probably struggling to get back on. I feel bad. Okay, so people go, oh, hang on a second. That might be her phoning. Hang on.
So as we're figuring that out, I'm just going to post the link to all the different resources that I talked about. In addition, at the bottom are many of the games that I've used in my classroom and some different quick examples of how I might use it. And hopefully you'll be able to take some of them and go with it. And hopefully it's some inspiration for you, which I think is the key there. So the girls that come into my class, this is a perfect example. The first time I did the zombie menu, I had 2 girls in my class, and the girls loved it just as much as the boys. And it was funny because they began to write things to outgross the boys to see if they were like, well, you think boys are so gross? Look at this. And they tried their best to do that. And they actually did some really fantastic, gross things to freak us all out. So that's good. And again, it's one of those things. I did have a student once, a boy once, that did not buy into zombies. And he did not want to write a zombie menu. And so instead, he wanted to write a real menu. And he was my first student to actually love writing a menu with real food. So always being open and flexible to those things is really important. And gender is not everything. It's also about personal interest and student voice. Another edu jargon word that I am sorry I used. Voice and choice, exactly. Louise has disappeared on me.
No, I'm right here. Okay, so Syria's computer completely froze, and so I have her here on speakerphone, and so she's going to say her thank you. Syria, go ahead and talk. We'll see if we can pick you up okay.
Okay, this is one of those occasions where technology doesn't work and you have to throw it out the window or try another technology. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for a very fun and engaging presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it tonight, and you certainly can relate to voice learning. You shared so many creative ideas to really get the boys thinking, learning, and writing. Your students are, I think, very fortunate to have you as their teacher. You seem very passionate and enthusiastic about what you do, and that enthusiasm has got to be infectious for your students. I'd like to thank each of you here tonight for giving of your valuable time to join us, and thank you for participating and sharing your creative ideas with you, and I hope that you can apply some of Jet's ideas to your classroom. do take a few minutes to fill in the exit survey that I'm hoping Louise has on the screen there, and give us your suggestions. Tonight is the second last presentation for this term. We are in the process of organizing the program for January through to June, and your feedback is really valuable to us. If you feel that you'd like to see more work on boys literacy, do let us know. That way we can get Jeff to participate some more for us and do a couple more sessions for us, and support you in this area. The link there will get you to tomorrow's session, and it'll also work for the new program that will probably be ready, I would say, mid-December. And so keep coming back and checking to see what's in store for January through to June. We've got a pretty exciting program in place, I think. And do share that link with your colleagues so they too can have as much fun as we did tonight. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all. Good night.